This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Folks, we are back with Dr. Sarada Krishnan. Welcome back, Sarada. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for having me again.
We are continuing our deep dive into a bunch of interesting things around crop diversity and food security and food sovereignty and the new workplace that you're going to, the Crop Trust. And in today's episode, I'd like to do a little deep dive on crop diversity and perhaps dabble a little bit in exploring the politics around that and the other volatile issues that really seem to have a hand in determining the outcomes of crop diversity, because it's not just as simple as, oh, look, we've got a new varietal, let's see what happens. There's a lot more at play in these kinds of things. So why don't we talk about, kick the conversation off with the idea of how many different varieties are there of coffee? Like you spoke about Madagascar. I've never had a coffee from Madagascar. Why haven't I had a coffee from Madagascar if it's got over 60 varieties?
So there is a difference. So it's we're talking about two different things. There is species and there is varieties.
Okay.
So species, so we have botanically, every plant has a genus name and a species name.
Yeah.
And we have the genus is Coffea. And then the species is Arabica, for Arabica coffee, or Coffea canephora for Robusta coffee, Coffea liberica for Liberican coffee. So the species, we have 130 species.
Okay.
And then, so of the species, there are 60 species in Madagascar. And then the Arabica coffee, when you start cultivating it, then you start seeing variations, and then you develop those variations. And it's like, in the wild, you have natural selection happening.
Right.
And then this is what you do once farmers start growing things in the field and they see a particular trait that is of interest to them. And that's what domestication has happened. And that is called artificial selection, human-led selection. Mm-hmm. And so Arabica coffee itself has numerous varieties.
Right.
So the Madagascan species are predominantly, the 60 plus species are predominantly caffeine-free. And they really won't taste very good.
Okay.
But so what we call for these wild species, they are called the crop wild relatives.
Okay.
So they are the relatives of the wild cousins of a cultivated crop species. So we cultivate Arabica coffee and Robusta coffee. Mm-hmm. And so, but it is so important that we protect these crop wild relatives. And the Crop Trust has a whole crop wild relatives program because all crops have crop wild relatives.
Can I ask why it's important that we protect them?
Because as I mentioned in the last episode, we never know with climate change which of these species might have drought tolerant trait or a disease or pest resistant trait. Right. So unless we protect it, we will not know what type of traits they have that we could use it in breeding programs to build resiliency in our cultivated coffee.
So perhaps we can go in and understand the genetic component of that plant that creates the resistance, and we can study it and then perhaps try and breed it into another species?
Yes. And many of the crop wild relatives, they are still found in the wild, but many of these wild spaces are under threat from either deforestation. So Madagascar alone, a majority of their 60 species are critically endangered because the forests have been almost destroyed or gone. So that's why what we call is ex situ conservation is where we bring those plants into the field and grow them in a area in rows, like in a botanic garden.
Right.
And then you conserve them. But with ex situ conservation, you are not getting the benefit of natural selection. When they are in the wild and growing wild, they are adapting to the climate, and so then natural selection happens, or evolutionary potential is there. Whereas once you bring them you are bringing a lower genetic diversity into your gene bank. And so you will lose some of that genetic potential for adaptation.
Is that also similar one of the reasons why monocropping is so harmful to our food security?
Yes, it is, because if like coffee, taking coffee for example, if you just grew one variety, say a Typica, because that's what I grow in Jamaica in my coffee farm. So Typica is very susceptible to coffee leaf rust.
Right.
And if my entire farm is covered and is grown with Typica, and if the coffee leaf rust epidemic comes about, then my entire farm, all the plants in my farm are wiped out. They're gone.
Right.
So that's monocropping. So I think any farm, if you have different varieties, so there are some of those hybrids called the Timor hybrids. And this was a natural hybrid that happened in the Timor Island in Indonesia, where it was a natural cross between an Arabica coffee and a Robusta coffee. And Robusta has much higher resistance to coffee leaf rust. And so due to that cross that happened spontaneously in a farm, that Timor hybrid has shown so much more resistance to coffee leaf rust. And that has been used as the basis for coffee leaf rust resistance in most breeding programs. Like in Brazil, they have developed the variety Sartimor, Catimor, anything with a more come from the Timor hybrid. Okay. So all of these, so you want to ensure that you don't lose your entire crop, that within your farm, in addition to Typica, which has very good taste, that you are also growing some of these other varieties, so that way you don't lose all your coffee crop.
Have you done any work on how crop diversity in coffee ends up benefiting the consumer?
So those are the different tastes, but typically a lot of the consumers do not even know what variety of coffee they're drinking.
Did you hear that, people? We need to just... the amount of time that I spend telling people that the customer doesn't really care what variety.
Yep.
They don't know what variety.
No.
The most they know is the origin. And so we spend so much time as an industry trying to educate people on this stuff. They don't care. They just want their latte with 2 sugars. That's it.
No, we have such a caffeine addicted society. We just need a caffeine. And so, yeah, I think a lot of times, I mean, the variety is more for the farmer's benefit, because the farmer needs to be educated about the variety and what might be the taste qualities, what are the disease and pest resistance. And there needs to be extension to the farmer and also resources to make these available so the farmer can make an informed decision of what to grow in their farm. But in many countries, it is impossible, because in Jamaica, I can't grow anything other than Typica, because that is not allowed. I cannot bring any other varieties into the country.
This is a really interesting spin on the discussion. So this is where we bring in things like bureaucracy and politics and things like that. What role is politics playing in crop diversity?
You know, politics can have a huge influence on crop diversity and what the farmer wants to grow, because I mean, each country, it is a commodity. Coffee is a commodity that contributes to the GDP of many countries. And so a lot of the government controls quite a bit of what can be grown and cannot be grown within that country. Because I know that Costa Rica would not allow any of the farmers to grow Robusta coffee. And it has to be only Arabica.
Why is that?
Because Robusta is considered to be of lower quality, flavor quality compared to Arabica. But it is all a matter of taste. Because I grew up in India drinking
Robusta.
Robusta coffee, and you get used to it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the specialty industry, the way we judge the specialty industry is by Arabica. So we should not judge other species with the Arabica taste profile, because we really need to develop a taste profile for each species. And I was recently at the SCA conference, SCA Expo in Boston, where they had the RICO Symposium, and I was part of a panel talking about the crop diversity and the diversity of taste. And we had tasting of the Robusta, Liberica, Coffea racemosa, Coffea eugenioides, Coffea stenophila. And so because each of them taste very different. So we cannot, because Liberica has its own flavor, and we should not be comparing Liberica with Arabica flavor. We need to develop a separate profile for Liberica, and that is the only way it'll make to the specialty industry and to consumers.
Yeah, I often wonder why this is such a still a contentious point in our industry.
So we really need to rethink what specialty means.
Isn't that the golden question of the industry? What is specialty coffee? What does it mean? How does it evolve under the current economic and political constraints that society is experiencing at a time where the price of commodity coffee versus specialty coffee is on completely different paradigms? The price on the C market has shifted tectonically compared to the price differentials between where specialty coffee was 3 years ago versus where it is now.
Yeah.
With regards to going back to what we're talking about with politics, we have what's happening in Ukraine and Russia influencing significantly the food security around the world, because there is an enormous amount of inputs that come from Ukraine and Russia that go into farming coffee, fertilizers and nitrogen and all those different kinds of inputs. When we talk about crop diversity, is our independence from being dependent on those inputs an important mitigating factor of how we navigate through politics now and into the future, do you think?
We've become such a global society. We are all dependent on each other. The world actually is becoming smaller and smaller because of, the grapes that I eat in my house in Denver, it comes from Chile, or from mangoes come from Mexico. And so we are so dependent for our food from around the world. And with what is happening in Ukraine, the wheat shortage is what is going to cause the food insecurity, because the wheat that you get from Ukraine that was exported to all over the world, now there is going to be a shortage because they are not growing wheat with all the turmoil that's happening there.
Right.
And so, so it is, that's why the whole system, the local, we always talk about grow local or the local food systems. But we have so gotten used to having apple year round, not at the production season. Mango year round. We've become so spoiled as a society, especially in the Western part, that we expect everything at any time when we want it. And so that is, it's our consumer. I mean, in the olden times when I was growing up, you only got lychee during one season, mango during one season. And so we've forgotten all of that. And and with coffee production too, of course, fertilizer, and it's not just the crop itself, but all the inputs that go into crop is also global. And so those all will impact, and the prices of gas going up for that increases the cost of fertilizers, and which makes it very unaffordable to a smallholder farmer. And if they don't have inputs to put on their farm, then your yield is going to be low, or you're going to be pest and disease incidence is going to be high. So this is it has a huge domino effect.
I'm going to admit to something here. I spend far too much time listening to Bloomberg at the moment and watching Bloomberg. Very interesting things going on with the concept of globalization and deglobalization, particularly around food security. And if you do spend some time listening to a lot of the financial media right now, the idea of deglobalization is an interesting term that keeps coming up in order to protect borders, in order to protect populations with regards to food security. Really interesting stuff. That's the way that politics and the global economy is going to come down to even the smallholder farmer.
Yeah.
Because if they can't get access to the inputs that they need, they'll go out of business.
Yeah, and the thing is, are we beyond a point of no return with regards to globalization? Because it has, at some point, how do you go back to deglobalization and become too local? I mean, you can't, the localization, I mean, you can be local and can produce local, but you still can't, I'm in Denver, I cannot produce mango or coffee here.
Not in the short time frame that we, right?
Yeah.
Not in the short time frame that we need.
No.
It's like, we've diminished the quality of soils.
Yes.
So much that in order to replenish them, it's going to take years in order to put that back.
Yeah.
So they're thinking that we're going to fix food security by deglobalizing very quickly and fixing supply chain issues, chip shortages, all that kind of stuff by deglobalizing very quickly. It's just not possible.
No, I don't think so.
So, again, we have to go to the globalization side of it, build relationships, work better together, have great political alliances so that can happen.
Yes.
It's all very interesting. In the next episode, I think that a lot of people would challenge the idea. Well, I guess not challenge, but I think they'd be surprised at how serious the food security issue is. And I thought that we could have a conversation about how we got here. Like, why in 2022 are we looking at issues with food security, and what role crops and seeds and stuff like that have to do with that? So we'll see you in the next episode, everyone. Thank you, Sarada.
Thank you.
Peace, love, and peanut butter, everyone. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.